Welcome this evening to the Temecula Valley Historical Society Monday night presentation. We're so pleased to have you. We hope that those out there will enjoy our program tonight. Amber, since I got to meet you, I just want to give you a wave. We have a new member here tonight. Happy to have her join us. And Dennis, too. Okay. Very good. Very good. We love doing these programs. We want to thank Lynn Coudet, who has organized the notable men and women so that we could do these on Monday evenings. And before I announce tonight's presentation, I want to tell you next Monday, Bill Veal will be here, and he will be telling us all about what it was like to be a Vail cowboy and teach us some roping tricks. So please join us if you can. Let others know what's going on so that they can come and enjoy a piece of this historic property and what's gone on here. Now tonight I want to welcome, I got ahead of myself there. I want to start by pointing out the building to the right here that is now the Coffee and Bakery. And it was actually built in the 1800s. In 1868, it was the home of Lewis Wolfe and his wife Ramona, along with their growing family. And Lewis became the postmaster for Temecula. And so the post office was located right here in the Wolfe store. The mail was delivered by stagecoach about 3 times a week. And I've been told you could set your watch by Mr. Hackett, the stagecoach driver, who was always very punctual, thus getting the nickname O.T. Hackett, standing for on time. Hackett. Residents living in the area could be found waiting at the Wolfe store for the stagecoach to arrive, and they were hoping for mail and wanted to hear maybe the most recent news or greet a visitor. The Wolfe store also provided rooms for travelers to spend the night, and Mr. Hackett was a frequent guest who spent many nights here. And you may not realize that you can go and look in these rooms, and they are set up as they were, and you can take a look in there. Next morning, after spending the night, O.T. would hitch up his horses early and start the trip back to San Diego. We're so grateful to have Gerry here tonight to share the story of O.T. Hackett, and I will turn it over to him. Mr. Hackett.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Turn the mic on. That do it?
Turn it off.
Okay, now it's on now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Does it need to be turned up?
Turn it up. How do we turn it up?
Right here.
Okay. All right.
Is that good?
As she said, my name is Samuel Hackett. And I was asked to talk about my association with Temecula. I figured to do this, I would start at the very beginning. And I was born in December of 1836 during a snowstorm in Worcester, Massachusetts. It was a rural setting, excuse me, it was a rural setting, and I lived there with my family. It's said that my mother was related to John Alden, who came over on the Mayflower. I was homeschooled during this period of time until I was 16 years of age. At 16, being a man grown and hungry for adventure, I decided I needed something different than growing up on the farm. So I left home, probably never to see my family again. Made my way to the city of Boston. Now, Boston was very different. I had never seen a house above 1 story. And there were houses 2 and 3 stories tall. But I knew what I wanted. I wanted to go to sea. I wanted adventure. So I went down to the harbor. With the number of ships in the harbor coming in from all over Europe, and talked to the sailors around about where do I want to go? I got a lot of good information about going to California. So I checked around and found a sailor that was going to California, and I signed on with him. It was a whaling vessel, and they were going to whale their way around until they arrived in San Francisco. And they talked about San Francisco being one of the most beautiful places in the world. I didn't know at the time, so I decided I would learn. One thing I learned a lot about hard work when I went aboard this vessel. It was scary the first time I had to go up into the rigging with the wind blowing and the ship rocking from side to side. But this is where I learned to love the ocean. The sunrises, the sunsets, the unlimited horizons. And it's how I became a man. I learned the craft of whaling as we hunted whales in both oceans. And what a hard, nasty smelling job it was. But it was a job, and I learned how to do it, and we continued for a number of years. We sailed down the east coast of America, or the United States at the time, and the coast of Mexico and the coast of South America. We would go out hunting whales, come in, and bring our catch in to the different cities and unload the whale oil and whatever. But as a younger boy, I was very, very eye-opening experiences. The noise, the people, the food, the music, and all was so different than I had grown up with in Massachusetts. As we continued whaling, we headed south with the idea of crossing into the Pacific Ocean around the tip of South America. We finally made the straits, but it was a real challenge. We sailed into the straits with the wind countering winds blowing from one direction, then immediately changing and blowing from another. The waves washing over the deck of the ship, where the crewmen on the deck had to tie themselves off to something stationary before they would get washed over the side. We made it successfully through after a few days and a lot of harrowing experiences. After whaling off the coast of South America, we continued towards California. During this time, through hard work and the fact that I stayed away from demon rum and women of loose morals, I was able to gather some money. And when the captain wanted to retire and go back east, he wanted to go back to his family, but he didn't want to go around the straits again. I was lucky I had the money. I was able to buy the ship and hire the crew and continue the whaling exercises throughout the Pacific Ocean. We landed in San Diego for a port call in 1858. I told myself then that this was where I wanted to live someday. The scent of lemon blossoms and orange blossoms and the breezes coming off the hills was just, it made it the place for me to live. We went back to sea and finally landed in San Francisco in 1859. And as we went into the harbor, I could see where people were saying it was a beautiful place. The green hills, the open bay. But as we got closer, more and more ships were in the harbor, sailing ships from all over the West Coast, around the world. The only problem was, at the time it was said that San Francisco was probably one of the most evil cities around. The harbor was lined with honky-tonks, bars, houses of ill repute, any way they could take money from the sailors. We stayed for a short time, unloaded our cargo, and went back to sea. I came back to San Diego as a whaler in 1867, bought some land and settled down near Fort Rosecrans, and made San Diego my home port. During times ashore between whaling trips, I met Mary Refugio Wilder. She agreed to become my wife, and we were married in 1880. I'm sorry, 1867. I'm sorry, Mary. I continued making whaling trips, but in 1869, I sold my interests in whaling. With encouragement from Mary. She was not really happy with me being gone so long. I settled down to raising cattle. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy died young of a childhood disease. The girl grew up, settled in San Diego, and married. I continued my cattle business until 1878. And it lost its appeal without family there, just the cattle. So I pretty much sold the cattle and signed on, having been a sailor and enjoying the ocean, I signed on with a steamer named Gypsy that made the run from San Diego to San Francisco. They carried people, they carried hides, they carried vegetables and fruit, whatever was needed, the stops they needed to make in between. I continued this for about a year until I met some deep water sailors in San Francisco that I had known before. And they were fitting up to go off the coast of Siberia hunting sea otters and whales. Seals, sorry. I'm used to whales. Sea otters and seals. I agreed and signed on with them. It was very, very cold when we went. Exceptionally cold, but the pelts were just absolutely beautiful from the cold. We came back to San Francisco with 422 pelts that we sold for the good price because there was demand for them. But I decided then that that was it. No more going to sea for me. I was getting older. It was getting harder and harder to sail on these sailing ships. I returned to San Diego where my daughter still lived and started a bee business and planted a lemon grove. And my life took a change in 1880 when I met and married Carrie Bensel. She came to the marriage with a son from a former marriage, and we had a daughter of our own. During this period of time, through friends and organizations, I met a Mr. A.J. Knight, who had a contract to carry the mail from San Diego to Temecula. Who had heard of Temecula? So I did some research and learned that the post office in Temecula had been reestablished in 1870 after having been closed for 7.5 years. And from 1870 to 1874, the mail was delivered intermittently from San Bernardino. It's the rate went from San Bernardino to San Diego. And they had served for 4 years. And the years from 1874 to 1878, Temecula had limited mail service. Just haphazardly they would deliver. As this was something I'd not done before, and I needed something to do other than watching the lemons, I purchased the mail contract, 46366. And unlike the route that came from San Bernardino, I went only one way and back, from San Diego to Temecula and back. The route was 72 miles long, and Mr. Knight had used 2 people to do it. One went south, one came north. They met in the middle, changed, and then turned around and went back again. I knew I could do it in a day, so I requested the Postal Department to let me do it by myself, which they agreed. And I asked for an extension of the contract and they granted it until June of 1886. I set up my route using what Mr. Knight had used quite a bit, where I could meet people, change horses, and do whatever needed in that respect. I usually made the trip in one day. I would pick up the mail that had come into San Diego on the train from the east, leave Old Town San Diego early in the morning, ford the San Diego River, take the Poway grade up into Poway, drop off what I needed in Poway, and I would continue through Bear Valley. Never met any bears in Bear Valley, but I went through Bear Valley. And ford the San Luis Rey River at Paula, and come down to Paula grade, ford the Temecula Creek, and deliver the mail to Lewis Wolf here at the Wolf store on the Paba Ranch. After 5 years of delivering this mail at 72 miles a day, I knew every tree and every rock on the trail. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I would pick the mail up early, head north, make my trip up to Temecula. Then on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, I would go back to San Diego. Sundays were my day off. And for this, I was paid $1,700 a year. After driving the stage line for a few months, I soon gained the reputation of always being on time. And people in San Diego were saying, well, they could set their watches by my arrivals and departures. In 1879, the San Diego Union wrote an article on me. And they said, he is always on time, Mr. On-Time Hackett. I've been reading Sackett books. Mr. Hackett is always on time. So they called me OT for on time, and that's where I picked up the nickname and kept the nickname for On-Time Hackett. Now the winters were not always kind to people that did the coach like I did. The rains came, interfered with the roads, the rivers. At times the rainstorms washed out the roads and flooded streams. And the San Diego civic leaders, in their idea of saving money, could not see building bridges over the rivers because they were dry in the summer. Why did you need a bridge if you could ford a dry stream bed? So at times he was stuck in Temecula, or I was stuck in Temecula for up to a week at a time because I couldn't get out because of the mud, the rain, and meeting people from all over. In fact, at one time in Bear Valley, in a 12-hour period, they measured over 3 inches of rain in a 12-hour period. During this period of time, California Southern built the railroad. Built it down the other side of Murrieta, down through Temecula Canyon, going into San Diego. Well, in 1884, that washed out. And it reduced the number of ways. Sometimes the San Diego River was so high that I couldn't get across. And it was too high to take a coach through. Well, in the time, I had a lightweight buckboard built. If it was only carrying mail, I would go with just the buckboard. And I would hook up one horse to the buckboard, go down to the railroad crossing that crossed over the river, and pull the buckboard across the river and have the horse swim it. Well, this was fine except for the station master in San Diego for the railroad. He became very irate and said I couldn't do that because this was railroad property. So I made a point of doing it when he wasn't looking. I would continue my route to Temecula. In the first 5 years, I delivered the mail to the Wolf store on the Pava Ranch. I traveled about 22,000 miles a year. It's a lot of distance. Feel sorry for the horses. For those 5 years, adding the 3 years I delivered the mail after they moved the post office to the railroad. The postal department let me continue for that extra 3.5 miles over a period of time. They did that for 19 months before the Postal Department decided that I needed a pay raise. They raised my pay by $90.15 a year, which I gathered at the time was pretty good. I continued this route until July of 1886, when I sold the route to Mr. Hicks from Oceanside. I did this as the wind, rain, swollen rivers, and stress to my body were getting to be too much to deal with. In 1886, I bought some property in Escondido and tried to start a stage line, which did not develop out very well. So I moved back to Temecula, back to San Diego, and continued raising bees and watching lemons grow. For something to do other than watching the lemons, I ran for city alderman and was elected as a city alderman in 1898. In the year of 1900, I was elected as superintendent of streets in San Diego. Continued that for a number of years and found the job very unrewarding because I could not convince the city fathers to build these bridges which would make San Diego grow, because people could find a way in and they wouldn't have to ford rivers to continue San Diego growth. During this period, I settled down. I quit in 1905 and went back to watching lemons grow and watching my grandkids grow. In the 1866, going back a ways, I met some people and joined the Masons and received a degree in Masonry. And I continued my association with the Masons in San Diego and continued on higher and higher in the association. And I continue it, he continued it, I continued it forever. And I was honored to speak to you all this evening, and thank you for listening, even though about my association with the city of Temecula. Thank you. Bless you.